The Valthic Empire was dying, and everyone knew it. What had once been a mighty civilization spanning 17 star systems was now crumbling like ancient paper in the wind. The golden towers of their capital world, Valthic Prime, still gleamed in the artificial sunlight, but the light in their people's eyes had long since faded. Commander Velthor burst through the doors of the emergency council chamber, his forearms shaking violently as he clutched the latest reports. His blue-scaled skin had turned pale gray with exhaustion and fear. Behind him, junior officers stumbled in carrying data tablets, their faces bearing the same hollow expression that had become common throughout the Empire. The massive circular chamber fell silent as Velthor approached the central podium. Hundreds of council members, their elongated heads turning toward him in unison, waited for news they already knew would be terrible. The holographic display above the chamber showed their empire's territory, but now most of it was marked in threatening red zones. Honored council members, Velthar began, his voice cracking despite his military training. Bring the final casualty reports from the Kepler 442 system. He paused, his throat working to form the words.
Ow.
The system has fallen completely. 30 billion souls. Gone. The Devourers consumed everything. Planets, moons, asteroid belts, even the gas giants. Nothing remains but empty space, and the echo of subspace distress calls that no one will ever answer. The chamber erupted in chaos. Council members chittered and hissed in their native tongue, their fear filling the air like smoke. Some collapsed in their seats while others began arguing about evacuation procedures. The ancient stone walls, carved with the history of their glorious past, seemed to mock them with memories of better times. Ambassador Quindel, the eldest of their species at over 300 years old, slowly rose from his throne-like chair at the center of the chamber. His once-proud crest had faded to silver, and deep lines marked his weathered face. But his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had guided their empire through countless crises. Silence, he commanded, his voice carrying across the chamber. With surprising strength, the chittering stopped immediately. We knew this day would come. The Devourer horde has been advancing through our territory for 2 years. We have lost system after system, colony after colony. Our greatest minds have found no weapon that can stop them. Velthar activated the holographic display, showing the horror that had consumed their empire. The images were almost too terrible to watch. Entire worlds stripped down to their core, their surfaces scraped clean by massive biomechanical creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and machine. Ships the size of small moons, their hull covered in what looked like living metal that pulsed with an evil red glow. The Devourers don't just kill, Velthor explained, his voice hollow. They consume. They tear apart everything organic and inorganic alike, feeding it into their ship bodies. They grow stronger with every world they destroy. Our weapons bounce off their adaptive armor. Our ships are just more food for their endless hunger. Elderly council member named Kekthar stood up, his walking stick shaking in his grip. What about our allies? Zephyrian Collective? The hegemony? Surely they understand the threat. Velthor's expression grew even darker. I've contacted them all. Hegemony claims they're dealing with territorial disputes and cannot spare forces. The Collective says our request falls outside their defensive treaties. The Andromedans won't even respond to our communications. They're hoping the Devourers will consume us and leave them alone. Cowards, spat another council member. They don't understand that when we fall, they're next. Quindel nodded slowly. Perhaps, but we cannot force them to see reason. We have only one option left. He paused, the weight of his next words visible in his sagging shoulders. We must broadcast a general distress signal across all known space, a plea for help to anyone who will listen. The chamber fell silent. A general distress signal was the ultimate admission of defeat, a public declaration that their once mighty empire was begging for mercy from strangers. Ambassador Velthor said carefully, even if we broadcast such a signal, who would respond? The major powers have already refused us. The minor species lack the military strength to help. We would be announcing our weakness to the entire galaxy. Quindel's eyes dimmed with resignation, but his voice remained steady. Because the alternative is extinction. We do nothing, the Valthic Empire dies with us. If we ask for help, perhaps. Someone, somewhere, will care enough to try. It's a slim hope, but it's the only hope we have left. The vote was unanimous. Within hours, their most powerful transmitters began broadcasting the distress signal across every known hyperspace channel. The message was simple and desperate. This is the Valthic Empire. We are under attack by an enemy that seeks to consume all life. We have fought with honor, but cannot prevail alone. We beg for aid from any who will hear this message. Help us, or watch the galaxy burn. For 3 standard days, the signal transmitted across the galaxy. The responses came exactly as expected. The hegemony sent a formal diplomatic note expressing sympathy, but citing prior commitments. The collective responded with a detailed analysis of why military intervention was not economically viable. Smaller powers either ignored the signal entirely or sent meaningless messages of moral support. Then, on the 4th day, something unexpected happened. A signal arrived from a small blue world in the Outer Rim territories, a planet that most galactic powers barely acknowledged existed. This is Admiral Junho of the Terran Defense Force. The transmission began, the voice clear and strong, despite the vast distance. We have received your distress call. Humanity pledges its full support to the Valthic Empire. Prepare to receive our diplomatic vessel for strategic coordination. We will help you fight this threat. The council chamber fell silent again, but this time it was stunned silence rather than despair. Quindel stared at the communication display, reading the message again to make sure he hadn't imagined it. Humans, whispered Kekthar. But they're barely spacefaring. They only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. What could they possibly do against the Devourers? Velthor accessed the galactic database, pulling up what little information they had about humanity. They're a young species, barely. Past their first interstellar wars? Their technology is primitive compared to ours. They have maybe a few hundred ships total, mostly exploration vessels and light frigates. But they responded, Quindel said quietly. When the mighty hegemony and the advanced collective turned their backs on us, these young humans offered to help. Perhaps their ships are few and their weapons weak, but they have something our other allies lack, honor. The debate continued. For hours, but the decision was already made. They were drowning, and someone had thrown them a rope. It might be a thin rope, but it was better than nothing. Send acknowledgement, Quindel ordered, his voice carrying a note of hope for the first time in months. Tell the humans we accept their aid gratefully. Any help is better than none. As the response signal departed for the distant blue world, none of the Valthic could have imagined what they had just set in motion. They saw humanity as a small gesture of kindness in their darkest hour, unaware that they had just made first contact with a species that took promises very, very seriously. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The warning sirens on Valthic Prime's orbital defense platform screamed as massive hyperspace signatures appeared at the edge of the seas. System. Commander Velthar rushed to his command post, expecting another Devourer scout force. Instead, his sensors detected something completely unexpected. Sir, his communications officer called out, her voice filled with confusion. It's not the Devourers. It's a human vessel. Single ship, medium displacement. They're requesting permission to dock at the diplomatic station? Velthar blinked his 4 eyes in surprise. Human? Already? Send them clearance codes and alert Ambassador Quindel immediately. The human diplomatic vessel engine dropped out of hyperspace with a grace that surprised everyone watching. Most young species had rough, jerky transitions when leaving faster than light travel, but this ship moved like it belonged among the stars. The vessel itself was smaller than typical diplomatic ships, with clean lines and a hull that seemed to shimmer with some kind of adaptive coating. At the diplomatic station, Ambassador Quindel prepared for what he assumed would be a brief courtesy meeting. He had arranged a small reception chamber and prepared a modest gift of Valthic crystal art. Perhaps the humans would offer some basic supplies or share their primitive weapons technology. Every little bit would help, even if it wasn't much. airlock hissed open, and Ambassador Quindel stepped forward with traditional Valthic greeting gestures. "Welcome, honored guests from Earth. We are grateful for your ... His words died in his throat as he saw what emerged from the human ship. This wasn't a small diplomatic party bearing token gifts. A full military analysis team poured out of the vessel, carrying advanced scanning equipment and tactical displays. Marines in combat armor flanked the group, their weapons kept politely lowered, but obviously ready for action. Admiral Junho stepped forward, and Quindel immediately understood why this human commanded respect. He was shorter than most Valthic, with graying hair and weathered hands that spoke of long years in space. But there was something in his dark eyes, a quiet intensity that made seasoned Valthic commanders instinctively straighten their postures. Admiral Quindel began, trying to recover his composure. "We deeply appreciate humanity's gesture of support. Any supplies you can spare, any outdated weapons or defensive technology, would be most welcome in our struggle against supplies." Admiral Junho interrupted, his electronic translator rendering his tone as genuinely confused. "Ambassador, you sent a distress call about an existential threat to your entire species. Humanity doesn't respond to that kind of emergency with leftover supplies and obsolete equipment." The human pulled out a compact device that immediately projected a detailed holographic display of the entire Valthic Empire. Star systems, trade routes, military installations, and fleet positions appeared in startling detail. Quindel realized with shock that the humans already knew more about Valthic space than some of his own council members. "I need complete intelligence on the Devourer Horde," Junho continued, his voice crisp and professional. "Their tactics, technology, fleet compositions, and movement patterns. Also need a full assessment of your remaining military assets, industrial capacity, and civilian evacuation capabilities. Time is critical if we're going to save your people." Captain Hygen stepped forward, a young human woman with sharp eyes and tactical gear that looked far more advanced than anything the Valthic had seen from Earth's few previous diplomatic contacts. "Admiral, our xenobiology teams are all ready, analyzing the biological samples the Valthic provided with their distress call. If these devourers are partially organic as reported, we can exploit their biological weaknesses." She activated her own display, showing detailed anatomical breakdowns of devourer bioships that made Quindel's scaled skin crawl. "We've identified several potential vulnerability points. Their organic components seem to rely on a distributed nervous system. If we can disrupt their neural pathways, we might be able to paralyze entire vessels." A third human, introduced as Colonel Minjun, spread out tactical maps of the Valthec's remaining colonies. "We'll need detailed defensive positions for every populated world. My advanced teams are already preparing insertion protocols for higher-risk evacuation scenarios. If the Devourers break through our defensive lines, we need civilian populations. Ready for immediate transport?" Quindel stared at the humans in complete bewilderment. You're taking this very seriously." Admiral Junho looked at him with an expression that somehow managed to be both patient and intense. "Ambassador, you asked for aid against an existential threat that wants to consume your entire species. Of course, we're taking it seriously. That's exactly what you'll receive from humanity." Behind him, human technicians were already setting up sophisticated communication arrays and tactical coordination systems. They moved with the efficiency of a species that had clearly done this before, transforming the simple diplomatic chamber into what looked like a military command center.
What
the Valthic couldn't see was the activity already taking place throughout human space. The moment Admiral Junho had received the Valthic distress call, he had sent a single encrypted message back to Earth Defense Command. One word that carried more weight than any formal declaration of war: mobilize. On Earth, factory complexes that had been producing civilian goods for decades suddenly shifted to military production. Orbital shipyards that built peaceful exploration vessels began forging warships. Mining colonies across human space increased their output to feed the growing war machine. The entire human military-industrial complex, dormant since their last major conflict 30 years ago, was awakening with frightening efficiency. Admiral Junho's second-in-command. Commander Deho was coordinating fleet movements from his mobile command ship. Human vessels from across their territory were converging on staging areas near Valthic space. Not just a few ships for a token rescue mission, but entire battle fleets equipped for extended warfare. On the Luna shipyards, workers labored around the clock to retrofit cargo vessels into troop transports. On Mars, weapons manufacturers were producing ammunition and plasma charges at wartime levels. Even civilian corporations were contributing, with mining companies redirecting their operations to provide raw materials for the war effort. Captain Hyjin received a steady stream of reports through her secure communication link. Admiral, the 3rd Fleet reports. Ready for deployment? The 5th and 7th Fleets are finishing resupply operations and will be ready within 48 hours. Marine divisions from 6 different worlds are boarding transport vessels. Valthic council members who had gathered to meet with the humans watched all this activity with growing amazement and confusion. They had expected a small gesture of solidarity, perhaps a few cargo ships with basic supplies. Instead, they were witnessing what appeared to be the mobilization of an entire civilization. "I don't understand," Quindel said quietly to Admiral Junho. "Your species barely knows us. We're strangers from across the galaxy. Why would you commit so much to our cause?" The human admiral looked at him with those intense dark eyes. "Because you asked for help?" In human culture, when someone sends a distress call about an existential threat, we don't calculate the political benefits or measure the economic costs. We ask one question: how do we help? Then we do whatever it takes to answer that question. Colonel Minjone looked up from his tactical displays. "Admiral, advance reconnaissance reports are coming in. The Devourers are massing for another major offensive. They'll likely hit the Kepler 438 system within 72 hours. "Then we'd better be ready for them," Junho replied calmly. "Send word to the fleet commanders. We're about to show these Devourers what happens when they threaten innocent people." The Valthic Council assumed the humans were simply being thorough in their token assistance. Impressive, but ultimately symbolic. They had no idea that Admiral Junho's first transmission back to Earth had set in motion the largest military mobilization in human history. They were about to discover that when humans make a promise, they don't just keep it, they exceed it in ways that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to have allies. The warning klaxons on Valthic Prime's orbital defense station had been silent for 3 weeks. Commander Velthor had almost begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, the Devourers had moved on to easier prey. That fragile hope shattered when his sensor operator suddenly bolted upright at her station. "Commander," she called out, her voice cracking with panic. Massive hyperspace signatures detected at the system's edge. Energy readings are off the charts. It's got to be the Devourers. They're coming for us. Velthor's 4 hearts began racing as he rushed to the tactical display. The readings were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Hundreds of signatures, maybe thousands. The Devourers had finally sent their main fleet to finish what they started. "Stations, battle alert," he ordered, his voice heavy with resignation. "Contact the remaining defense fleet. Tell them to make ready for our final stand." But as the signatures resolved into actual vessels, something wasn't right. The identification codes weren't showing the twisted biomechanical signatures of Devourer ships. Instead, clean, precise markers appeared on his screen. "Human markers." "Impossible," Velthor whispered, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. "These readings. There are thousands of vessels. How could the humans have so many ships?" The communication array crackled to life with a voice that had become familiar over the past 3 weeks. "Velthic Command, this is Admiral Junho aboard the TDF Sol. The first Terran Expeditionary Fleet has arrived and is taking position, requesting immediate tactical coordination with your defense forces." Velthar could only stare as the human fleet began organizing itself with military precision that put his own forces to shame. Massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small city, anchored the battle line. Their hulls gleamed with armor plating that seemed to shift and adapt to different energy signatures. Behind them, Heavy cruisers formed protective formations, while destroyers and frigates filled the gaps between larger vessels. But it was what filled the spaces between the capital ships that truly amazed the Valthic observers. Swarms of fighters, assault craft, and support vessels moved in perfectly coordinated patterns. Each squadron knew exactly where to go, creating a defensive network that covered the entire star system. By the ancestors, breathed Velthor's communications. Officer, look at their formation. It's like watching a living organism. Every ship knows its place. Captain Hajin's ship, the heavy cruiser Busan, immediately began deploying what looked like thousands of small objects into space. Velthor's sensors quickly identified them as reconnaissance drones, each no larger than a Velthic fist, but packed with sophisticated scanning equipment. Velthic command. This is Captain Hajin. Her voice came through the comm clearly. We're establishing overlapping sensor networks throughout your system. These drones will monitor every asteroid, moon, and debris field. Nothing will move in this system without us knowing about it instantly. The drones spread out like an expanding web, taking positions at every strategic point in the system. Within hours, the humans had created a sensor network more comprehensive than anything the Valthic had ever imagined possible. Colonel Minchun's massive troop transport, the Daegu, moved into orbit around Valthic Prime. From its bays emerged smaller vessels carrying what appeared to be entire armies. The human ground forces began coordinating with bewildered Valthic commanders who had never seen such organization. We need detailed topographical data on every world the Devourers might target, Colonel Minjun explained to the Valthic Defense Council. My Marines are prepared for extended surface operations. If the Devourers make planetfall anywhere in your territory, they'll find us waiting for them. The Valthic officers exchanged confused glances. Marines? Asked one. You mean ground soldiers? But the Devourers fight in space. They consume entire worlds from orbit. Colonel Minchun's expression remained serious, our intelligence suggests. They also deploy biomechanical ground forces to secure valuable resources before consumption. If they try that here, they'll face human Marines. Trust me, they won't enjoy the experience. The human preparation was unlike anything the Valthic had ever witnessed. Support vessels immediately began establishing supply chains and forward operating bases on asteroids and moons throughout the system. Mobile repair stations took position behind the battle line, ready to service damaged vessels. Hospital ships prepared to receive casualties. The humans were clearly planning for a long campaign, not a desperate last stand. The first test of the human forces came sooner than expected. Just 2 days after the fleet's arrival, Velthar's new sensor network detected familiar signatures approaching from the outer system. Devourer scouts, biomechanical monstrosities the size of frigates, emerged from hyperspace, expecting to find a dying Valthic defense force preparing for slaughter. Instead, they found something that shouldn't have existed. The Devourer scouts were horrific to look at, even on a tactical display. Their hulls were a mixture of living tissue and twisted metal, pulsing with veins that carried some kind of biomechanical fluid. Organic weapons pods sprouted from their surfaces like tumors already charging with the energy that would strip mine. Another world, the human response was immediate and devastating. Fighter squadrons led by Commander Deho launched from 3 different carriers simultaneously. The small craft moved with precision that seemed almost supernatural, each pilot knowing exactly where their wingmen would be at any given moment. Devourer scouts have locked onto our position. Commander Deho's voice came through the calm despite the approaching battle. All squadrons engage at will. Let's show these things what happens when they mess with our friends. The human fighters struck the Devourer scouts like a swarm of angry hornets. Their plasma cannons tore through organic armor with surgical precision, targeting the vulnerable spots where living tissue met mechanical components. The Devourer's adaptive defenses, which had proven so effective against Valthic weapons, seemed confused by the human tactics. But what truly horrified the Valthic observers was what happened when the human fighters began running low on ammunition. Instead of retreating or calling for resupply, the pilots did something that defied all military logic. They began ramming their small craft directly into the enemy vessels. No! Velthor shouted, watching one human fighter accelerate directly into a Devourer scout's command section. The explosion tore a massive hole in the enemy vessel, but it also meant the death of the human pilot. "They're insane," Velthar breathed, watching another human pilot sacrifice himself to take out a Devourer weapon system. "They're throwing their lives away for nothing." Ambassador Quindel, who had been observing the battle from the command center, placed a gentle claw on Velthor's shoulder. "No, my friend," he said quietly, his voice filled with growing understanding. "They're not insane, they're committed." The battle lasted only 30 minutes, but it completely changed how the Valthic viewed their human allies. The Devourer's scouts, which had terrorized Valthic space for months, were reduced to drifting wreckage. Not a single enemy vessel escaped to report back to their main fleet. But the cost had been heavy. 12 human pilots had given their lives in ramming attacks, choosing to die rather than let even one Devourer escape. As the surviving fighters returned to their carriers, Velthar listened to the radio chatter between the human pilots. "It blew. Squadron to Seoul," came one pilot's voice. "We've lost Yongseek and Hyenwoo in the attack. They saved us all by taking out that command ship." "Understood, Blue Squadron," Admiral Junho's voice replied. "Their sacrifice will be remembered. All pilots, excellent work. You've sent a clear message to the enemy. They know we're here now." In the aftermath of the battle, as human recovery teams searched for survivors and salvaged useful technology from the Devourer wrecks, Velthor began to understand what they were dealing with. The humans hadn't just sent a token force to help their new allies. They had mobilized their entire military machine and were prepared to fight with an intensity that bordered on fanatical. "Commander," his communications officer called out, "Admiral Junho is requesting a meeting with our defense council. He says they need to discuss strategy for the main Devourer fleet." Velthor nodded slowly. "Tell the Admiral we'll meet him in 1 hour and send word to Ambassador Quindel. I think we need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about our human allies." As he prepared for the meeting, Velthor couldn't shake the image of those human fighters ramming into enemy vessels without hesitation. The Valthic had asked for help, and humanity had responded with something far beyond their wildest expectations. They had unleashed a force that fought not just for victory, but for the complete annihilation of any threat to their allies. The real war was just beginning. The war changed everything. What had started as skirmishes between human fighters and Devourer scouts quickly escalated into something that made the Valthic question everything they thought they knew about warfare. The Devourer horde, apparently surprised by the unexpected resistance, began deploying weapons that had been held in reserve for truly dangerous threats. "Commander." Velthar watched in horror as his long-range sensors detected massive signatures approaching the outer system. These weren't the frigate-sized scouts they had been fighting. These were bioships the size of small moons, their hulls pulsing with organic life and bristling with weapons that could consume entire fleets. "Admiral Junho," Velthar called through the communication link, his voice tight with fear. "We're detecting 3 massive Devourer vessels approaching. Each one is over 50 kilometers long. Our combined fleets don't have enough firepower to scratch their hulls." The human admiral's response was calm, almost casual. "Understood, Commander. We expected this escalation. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th expeditionary fleets are already en route. They should arrive within 48 hours. Velthar blinked, his 4 eyes in disbelief. "More fleets? How many ships does humanity have?" "Enough," was Admiral Junho's simple reply. The Valthic had no concept of what they were about to witness. Cross-human space, an unprecedented mobilization was taking place. The industrial world of New Jeju had transformed overnight from a peaceful manufacturing center into a fortress factory. Its orbital platforms worked around the clock, producing ammunition, replacement parts, and new weapons at a pace that defied belief. On the surface of New Jeju, factory workers labored in 24-hour shifts. Children in schools were taught to assemble basic components during their education periods. Elderly citizens operated quality control stations. The entire world had become a single, massive weapons factory dedicated to supporting the war effort, But New Jeju wasn't alone. Human colonies across known space were contributing everything they could. Mining worlds stripped their asteroids bare to provide raw materials. Agricultural planets converted their food production to military rations. Even pleasure worlds turned their entertainment facilities into training centers for new recruits. When the human reinforcements arrived, the scale was beyond anything the Valthic had imagined. 3 more complete battle fleets, each larger than the first. Thousands of additional vessels filled the space around Valthic Prime, creating a defensive network that stretched across multiple star systems. Captain Hijin's intelligence ship, Busan, had become the center of a scientific revolution. Her teams worked day and night analyzing captured devourer technology and biological samples. What they discovered changed everything. Admiral Captain Hijin reported during a strategy meeting, her eyes bright with the excitement of discovery. "We found their weakness. The devourer's biomechanical systems are vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. If we can broadcast these frequencies at sufficient power, we can disrupt their nervous systems and paralyze their ships." The solution the humans developed was characteristically direct and terrifying. They began loading their ships with massive electromagnetic broadcasting equipment, then ramming them directly into devourer vessels while transmitting the disruption frequencies at maximum power. "It's suicide," Commander Velthor protested during a joint planning session, watching human crews volunteer for what were essentially kamikaze missions. "You're asking your people to die?" Colonel Minjan looked at him with those intense human eyes that had become so familiar. "It's effective. My Marines have successfully boarded and neutralized 7 bioships using this method." The crews knew the risks when they volunteered. Every single one of them volunteered. The human boarding operations were unlike anything in Valthic military doctrine. While their ships rammed into devourer hulls, broadcasting the paralyzing frequencies, teams of human Marines in heavy combat armor would breach the enemy vessels and fight their way through corridors of living nightmare. Lieutenant Commander Yunji, barely 25 years old by human standards, had become legendary among both human and Valthic forces for her boarding operations. She led teams of Marines into the horrific interior of devourer bioships, fighting through corridors where the walls were made of living metal that tried to crush intruders, and organic weapons that fired acid and biomechanical parasites. The environment inside these ships is like fighting through the digestive system of some cosmic monster, she reported. After one particularly brutal mission, her combat armor scarred and pitted with acid burns. "The air is toxic, the gravity shifts randomly, and every surface is trying to kill you. But we adapt." Her teams used flamethrowers to burn through organic barriers, plasma cutters to carve through biomechanical defenses, and explosives to destroy the central nervous systems that controlled the massive vessels. Each mission was a journey into hell, but the humans kept volunteering for them. "The Devourers adapt to our weapons after each encounter," Lieutenant Commander Yunji explained during a briefing, showing footage from inside a bioship that made several Valthic observers physically ill. "Their organic components learn from each attack, but we adapt faster. Each boarding action teaches us more about their weaknesses, and we modify our tactics accordingly." The human approach to warfare was beginning to disturb even their Valthic allies. During one particularly intense battle, Velthar watched as a human destroyer, its weapons exhausted and engines failing, deliberately rammed into a devourer bioship while broadcasting the disruption frequency. The impact destroyed both vessels, but it also saved a Valthic colony ship carrying 3 million civilians. "They're transforming their entire civilization into a weapon," Ambassador Quindel observed quietly, watching human supply ships arrive. With fresh ammunition and replacement crews, every human world is contributing to this war effort. They've made our survival their primary objective. The scale of human commitment was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Species typically fought for their own territory, their own resources, their own survival. But humanity had taken the Velthec's plea for help and transformed it into something approaching a religious crusade. On Earth itself, recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. Young humans lined up for days to join the expeditionary fleets. Families sent their children to war with pride, knowing they were fighting to save an alien species they had never met. News broadcasts showed human civilians working in factories, all of them united by a single purpose: help the Volthic survive. We don't understand them. Velthor confided to Quindel after watching another human crew volunteer for a suicide mission to destroy a Devourer command ship. They're dying for us, thousands of them. They act like it's the most natural thing in the galaxy. The Valthic were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity had demonstrated what total war actually meant, when waged not for conquest or resources, but for the simple principle that when someone asks for help, you give everything you have to provide it. The humans had turned their entire species into a weapon dedicated to someone else's survival. And the terrifying thing was, it was working. The Devourer advance had not just stopped, it was being pushed back by sheer human determination and an willingness to sacrifice that bordered on the incomprehensible. The real question was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity was becoming in the fires of this war. The moment had finally come. After months of brutal warfare, the combined human-Valthic fleet had traced the Devourer horde back to their source. What they found defied all understanding of what a planet should be. The Devourer homeworld wasn't really a world at all. It was a massive organic construct, part living planet and part starship, that pulsed with malevolent life. Its surface writhed with biomechanical structures that looked like a fusion of cathedral and cancer. Massive tentacles the size of mountain ranges swept through space around it. While organic weapon arrays tracked the approaching fleet, Admiral Junho stood on the Bridge of the Soul, watching the nightmare planet through the view screen. Around him, his combined fleet had grown to tens of thousands of vessels. Human ships from across known space, joined by the surviving Valthic defense forces, formed the largest military armada in galactic history. All units, this is Admiral Junho, he announced, his voice carrying across thousands of ships. Today we end this threat forever. No Devourer vessel leaves this system. No organism escapes to threaten innocent life again. This is our final stand, not just for the Valthic, but for every species that values freedom and life. The response was immediate. Across the fleet, human and Valthic voices joined in acknowledgement. Young pilots like Commander Deho checked their weapons one last time. Veteran Marines like Colonel Minjun inspected their combat gear. Scientists like Captain Haijin made final adjustments to their biodisruption weapons. The battle began with a horror that exceeded even their worst expectations. The Devourer homeworld's response was to birth new ships directly from its surface. Biovessels the size of continents tore themselves free from the planet's flesh, their hulls still dripping with organic fluids. These weren't just ships, they were living weapons, each one capable of consuming entire fleets. The organic weapons on these continent-sized vessels fired streams of acid that could eat through the strongest armor. Living metal projectiles sprouted legs and claws, attempting to burrow through hull plating to reach the crew inside. Biological viruses designed to corrupt both organic and artificial systems spread through space like invisible death. But the human response was exactly what the Valthic had come to expect. They met the nightmare head-on. Captain Hajin's massive dreadnought Bio-Cean accelerated directly toward the largest bioship, its hull blazing with every weapon it possessed. Her crew had volunteered for what they all knew was a suicide mission. As the ship's weapons exhausted their ammunition, she gave the order that would define the final battle. All hands, prepare for manual reactor detonation. It's been an honor serving with you all, her voice carried across the ship's communication system. Remember, we're not dying for strangers. We're dying for friends. The Busan rammed directly into the bioship's central mass, penetrating deep into its organic core before Captain Haijin manually triggered the reactor overload. The explosion tore the massive enemy vessel apart from the inside, creating a chain reaction that destroyed 3 more bioships in the resulting blast. On the planet's surface, Colonel Minchun's Marines had achieved something that should have been impossible. They had fought their way through the planet's defensive systems, using combat exoskeletons and plasma weapons to carve paths through living corridors that tried to digest them. Their mission was to plant charges on the planet's central nervous system. The massive organic brain that controlled the entire Devourer network. This is Colonel Min Jun. His voice crackled through heavy static as his team fought through the planet's immune system. We've reached the core chamber. The biocharges are in place. Tell the fleet to pull back. This is going to be a big one. But the most critical mission fell to Commander Daeho and his elite fighter squadron. They had to penetrate the planet's outer defenses and deliver a special payload to the planet's core, a bioweapon that Captain Hyjin's team had developed specifically to destroy the Devourer's central intelligence. The approach was a nightmare of organic defenses. Tentacles the size of buildings whipped through space, trying to swat the fighters like insects. Living weapons sprouted from the planet's surface, firing biomechanical projectiles that could home in on their targets. Very air around the planet was toxic, forcing the pilots to rely entirely on their ship's life support systems. Blue Squadron, this is Daeho. The commander's voice came through the communication system as his fighters dove through layers of organic defense systems. We're beginning final approach. If we don't make it out, tell my family I died fighting for friends. All units follow me in. The fighter squadron's attack was coordinated with surgical precision. Each pilot knew their role, and each was prepared to die to complete the mission. As they penetrated deeper into the planet's defenses, the losses mounted. Fighter after fighter fell to the organic weapons. But the survivors pressed on. Commander Daeho's fighter was the last one to reach the planet's core. His ship was barely functional, its hull breached in a dozen places, but the bioweapon was still intact. As he dove toward the target, enemy fire tore through his remaining systems. This is Daeho. His voice crackled through heavy static. Payload. Delivered, the job is done. It's been an honor serving with you all. The explosion that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The bioweapon spread through the planet's nervous system like wildfire, causing massive organic failures throughout the entire construct. The planet convulsed, its surface cracking and bleeding into space. Secondary explosions rippled across its surface as different systems failed. Then came the final detonation. The charges that Colonel Min Chian's Marines had planted reached the planet's core, triggering a chain reaction that tore the entire construct apart. The explosion was so massive that it was visible from 3 star systems away, a brief new star that announced the end of the Devourer threat. When the radiation cleared and the debris settled, nothing remained of the Devourer homeworld but expanding gas clouds and scattered wreckage. The threat that had consumed 17 Valthic systems and terrorized the galaxy was extinct. The organic network that had connected all Devourer forces across space had been severed forever. In the aftermath, Admiral Junio met with Ambassador Quindel aboard the Sol. The Valthic elder looked older than his 300 years, his crest dim with exhaustion and grief. But there was something else in his eyes, a deep understanding that had been forged in the fires of war. Your species lost over 2 million personnel in this campaign, Quindel said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of sacrifice. Entire fleets destroyed, worlds stripped of resources to feed the war machine. And for what? We're strangers to you when this began. Admiral Junho gazed out at the stars where human ships were already beginning their withdrawal. The job was done, and humanity was returning to its peaceful expansion across the galaxy. Because you asked for help, Ambassador? In human culture, when someone asks for help against an existential threat, we don't calculate the cost or measure the benefit. We ask one question: what do they need? Then we provide it. And now, Quindel asked, his voice carrying centuries of political experience, what does humanity want in return for this sacrifice? Territory, resources, tribute. The Admiral smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed both warmth and absolute steel. Nothing. We helped because it was the right thing to do.
Our
threat is ended. Our job is complete. It's all the reward we need. As the human fleets departed over the following weeks, they left behind only communication arrays and friendship treaties. No occupation forces, no territorial claims, no demands for payment. They simply returned to their own space, carrying With them the knowledge that they had saved an entire species from extinction. Ambassador Quindel finally understood what they had witnessed. Humanity didn't just take requests for aid seriously, they took them personally. The Valthic had begged for help, and humanity had responded. By making their survival a sacred cause worth any sacrifice, the humans had proven that some species, when faced with a plea for help, would move mountains, sacrifice millions, and cross galaxies to honor that request. The Valthic had learned that when humans make a promise, they keep it no matter the cost. In the depths of space, human colonies continued their peaceful expansion. But now they did so knowing they had earned the eternal friendship of the Valthic Empire. And across the galaxy, other species began to understand a new truth about humanity. They were the people you called when you needed someone to take your problems seriously. The galaxy had learned that. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their absolute commitment to keeping their word. The end.